The night was silent, but the silence was heavy, like something was hidden inside it. In the middle of an old barn, under a dim yellow light, a shadow stood, massive and still. People who passed by stopped and stared. They whispered to each other, their eyes full of fear. Nobody dared to go too close. Nobody dared to touch. The shadow moved slowly, and the wooden floor creaked under the weight. Chains rattled, metal against wood, and the sound made even strong men uneasy. It was not a monster, but at first sight it looked like one. Huge body, wide shoulders, breathing loud, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Children pressed against their parents and asked, "What is that?" But no answer came. Only nervous glances. Only shaking heads. The villagers knew the story, or at least parts of it, but none spoke it aloud. The creature was too big, too strong, and too silent, and that silence scared them. Inside the barn she stood still, her breath making small clouds, in the cold air. She did not speak, she could not, but her eyes told a story. Eyes soft, filled with questions, filled with sadness, but no one looked deep enough to see. For them, she was only a problem, a mistake too large to be ignored. The whispers grew louder. "She is dangerous," one said. "She is useless," said another. "She was not born normal." A third voice added. They talked as if she could not hear, but she heard everything. She lowered her head and closed her eyes, wishing for silence again. Nobody remembered the day she was born. Nobody celebrated it. Her size was shocking from the very first day. Too big, too heavy, too different. At first they wondered if she was a blessing. Maybe she could be strong. Maybe she could give more. But as she grew, their hopes turned into fear. She was not like the others. She could not do what the others did. And in the world she lived in, being different was not a gift. It was a curse. The barn smelled of hay and iron, a mixture of life and captivity. Her chains were not tight, but they were enough to remind her that she did not belong. She could move, but only within the small circle allowed to her. She could look outside the open cracks of the wooden wall and see the world, but she could not step into it. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would hear the sound of freedom, birds calling from the trees, dogs running in the yard, wind playing in the grass. She would listen, her ears rising, her heart beating faster. But when she tried to step forward, the chain pulled her back, and she returned to stillness, her body too heavy to dream. The villagers often gathered at the barn, some out of curiosity, some out of fear. They looked at her as if she was not alive, as if she was only an object, a thing too big, too strange, too wrong. And yet there was a mystery that none could explain. Despite her size, despite her silence, her eyes always seemed to call for something. Something gentle, something human, something nobody was ready to give. Time passed slowly, days turning into weeks, weeks into months, and the whispers grew sharper, harder. She is too big to control. She is too big to keep. She is too big to breed. The words repeated again and again like a curse echoing in the barn. But she was not angry. She did not roar. She did not fight. She only stood still, waiting, listening. Maybe she did not know what she was waiting for. Maybe she hoped someone would see her not as a shadow, not as a mistake, but as life. But no one came, not yet. The barn door often opened with a loud screech and men entered with tools. They checked her chains, they checked her food, they checked her weight, but they never checked her heart. They never asked what she felt. To them, feelings did not matter. Only size, only usefulness, only profit. Outside, the world moved fast. Farmers worked, traders sold, children played, life continued. But inside, her world was frozen. She was trapped between being alive and being forgotten. And that's strange. Space was filled with silence, a silence so deep that even her own breathing felt too loud. Yet there was one thing that made her story different. Her presence itself. Everyone who looked at her could not forget her. They went home and whispered about her at night. Her size, her mystery, her silent eyes. They haunted people's thoughts. She was not just an animal, she was a question no one could answer. And deep inside, that question grew heavier, Why was she here? And what would happen to her? As the moon rose higher and the barn fell quiet again, she lifted her head slowly and looked through the cracks at the night sky. Stars blinked back at her, free and endless. She blinked too, as if trying to ask them for strength. Her story was not over, it had only begun, but no one knew how it would end, not even her. Morning light touched the barn, soft and golden, but the air inside was heavy. The creature stood in silence, her shadow longer than the walls around her. People arrived early, their boots stamping on the ground, their voices low, their eyes fixed on her. They came not to admire, but to judge. They looked at her as if weighing a problem that had no answer. At last the truth was spoken, whispered first, then louder. "She is only a cow," someone said. "A cow, yes, but not like any other." Her body was larger, her frame heavier, her form massive. She was not sick, she was not weak, but she was not what they wanted her to be. She was not useful to them, and that was the truth. They could not hide anymore. The farmers gathered, shaking their heads. "She cannot breed," one man said, his voice firm. "She is too big, too strange, she cannot give calves." Another agreed, their words cut deeper than any chain, for they were final. In their world, a cow that could not breed was worthless. Her size, once seen as strength, now became her curse. She listened, though they thought she could not understand. Her ears flicked. Her eyes moved. Her breath grew heavy. Each word was like a stone added to her heart. Too big, too useless, too wrong. The whispers became louder, turning into laughter. "She eats too much hay. She takes too much space. She gives nothing in return." Every word made her smaller in spirit, though her body was massive. And so the decision was made: she would be sold, not as a mother, not as a gift, not as a being, but as meat. Her fate was sealed with careless voices, with cold decisions. The villagers agreed, and no one raised a question. It was the easy choice and the cruel choice. They did not see her soul, they only saw numbers. The barn door opened wider, light flooding in. She stepped forward slowly. Pulled by ropes in human hands, her hooves hit the ground with heavy thuds. The earth itself seemed to shake under her weight. Children watched from a distance, their eyes wide. Some gasped, some whispered, some laughed. Nervously, to them she was strange, frightening, almost unreal. A giant cow too big for their world. But if someone had looked deeper, if someone had dared to meet her eyes, they would have seen something else. Not danger, not uselessness, but sadness, a longing for kindness, a quiet cry for life. But no one looked, no one wanted to see. The market was waiting, loud and cruel. Men shouted, animals cried, ropes pulled, sticks struck. She stood in the middle, towering over the rest. Her size drew attention, but not admiration, only mockery. "She is too big to breed," they repeated, laughing. "She is only good for meat," others agreed. Voices overlapped, rising and falling like waves, but not one voice spoke for her. Her eyes moved slowly across the faces, searching for something she had never found. A spark of mercy, a hint of care, a moment of understanding. But all she saw was greed, impatience, and laughter. Her heart sank deeper, her body swayed. She did not fight, she did not resist. It was not in her nature to fight. It was only in her nature to hope. But hope was growing thin. The auctioneer shouted louder, calling for bids. Hands went up, prices were named. Each number was another step closer to the end. Each voice another reminder that she was only meat to them. Chains rattled as she shifted her weight. Her ears flicked at the noise, her tail swayed slowly. But inside, silence. She had learned to be silent, to carry her pain quietly. And yet in that silence a question remained. Why was she made this way? Too big for life, too big for use, too big for love. Why did her heart still beat with hope when no one wanted her? Why did her eyes still search for kindness when none was given? The villagers did not ask these questions. They had no time for such thoughts. For them, she was already gone. Her story was over before it began. Her worth measured not in life, but in weight. Not in love, but in money. The sun moved higher, shadows grew shorter. The bidding continued, the crowd restless. She stood still, her breath steady, her eyes calm. But deep inside, her soul trembled. She knew what was coming. She knew they had no mercy. And yet something inside her refused to break. A small flame, fragile but alive. A belief that maybe, just maybe, one day, someone would see. Not her size, not her curse, but her heart. The truth was revealed. She was not a monster, not a mystery, only a cow. A cow too big to breed, too big to belong. And because of that, they sold her for meat. The world had judged her. The world had rejected her. And yet, her story was not finished. Though no one knew it, though no one cared, her journey was only beginning, and destiny had prepared something different, something greater. But for now, all she knew was sorrow. All she felt was the weight of rejection. And all she heard were the cruel voices of those who could not see her soul. The sun burned bright above the market, the heat heavy on the ground. Voices rose high, blending with the cries of animals, the clatter of cages, the shouts of traders. It was not a place of kindness. It was a place of noise, greed, and survival. And in the center of it all stood the giant cow, her shadow stretching wide across the dust. The ropes pulled tight around her neck. Men guided her forward with harsh hands. Each step she took sent dust flying, her hooves heavy against the earth. Crowds gathered quickly, their eyes full of curiosity, some with laughter, some with hunger. "She is enormous," someone said. "She could feed a whole village," another shouted. The word spread fast, and soon the crowd grew larger, voices sharper. The auctioneer climbed onto a wooden platform, his voice loud and commanding. "Here she is," he announced. "Too big to breed, too big to keep, only good for meat." The crowd answered with whistles, claps, and mocking cheers. Children pointed and laughed, men shook their heads, women whispered with pity. No one saw her as a life. No one saw her as a soul. To them, she was only weight, only meat, only money. The bidding began, loud and cruel. 500, a man shouted. 600, another countered. The auctioneer slammed his stick against the platform, pushing the price higher. The numbers rose fast, hands flying into the air, faces filled with greed. But with every number called, the cow's heart sank deeper. Each voice reminded her that she was not wanted for who she was, only for what she could give in death. Her eyes moved slowly across the crowd. She searched again, as she always did, searching for something human, something gentle. But all she saw were hungry eyes, sharp teeth hidden behind smiles. The noise grew unbearable. Her ears twitched, her head lowered. The ropes pulled tighter, forcing her to stand tall, to be displayed like an object. The auctioneer laughed as the numbers climbed. "She is worth more than 3 normal cows," he shouted proudly. The crowd cheered, clapping and stomping. But not one clap was for her, not one cheer was for her life. They celebrated her size only because it meant more meat, more profit, more gain. Some men joked loudly. "She eats more than she is worth. She is a waste of space. She will never be a mother." Their words stabbed like knives, though they never touched her body. Her heart carried the wounds, silent and unseen. The bidding slowed, the price reaching higher and higher. Some dropped out, shaking their heads, muttering about cost. Others stayed, determined, greedy. The auctioneer's eyes sparkled with excitement. This was business. Nothing more, nothing less. But for her, it was life. It was death. It was the end of all hope. She swayed gently, her massive body shifting, not from weakness but from sorrow. The dust clung to her skin, the sun burned her back, the rope burned her neck. Still she did not resist. Still she did not fight. Her spirit whispered that resistance was useless. Her silence was her only shield. Children ran closer, trying to touch her legs. Mothers pulled them back, fearful of her size. "She could crush you in a second," one woman warned. But the cow only stood still, her eyes calm, her heart broken. She had no anger, only grief. And yet that grief was invisible to the crowd. The auctioneer raised his hand, calling for the final bid. "One last chance," he shouted. "Who will take her? Who will claim this giant beast? The crowd buzzed, hands lifted, voices clashed, numbers echoed like thunder. But to her, each number sounded like a countdown to an ending she did not deserve in that moment. She remembered nights in the barn, the sound of birds outside, the wind through the cracks, the little pieces of freedom she had never touched. Her eyes lifted toward the sky, searching for stars. But in daylight, no stars appeared, only smoke, only dust, only human greed. The auctioneer slammed his stick once more, his voice sharp. "Sold," he declared, the crowd erupting in cheers. The decision was made, her fate sealed. But the story was not over. Not yet. For somewhere in the back, unseen by most, a pair of eyes watched differently, not with greed, not with laughter, but with silence, and silence can be stronger than noise. The cow lowered her head, her body trembling with exhaustion. She did not know who had bought her. She did not know what awaited, but deep inside the fragile flame of hope still flickered. She had been judged, mocked, and sold. But destiny is not always written by crowds. Sometimes it is written by the quiet ones. And one such quiet soul had just stepped forward. The crowd was loud, cheering and laughing as the auctioneer dropped his stick. The giant cow stood still, her eyes heavy, her breath slow, her heart filled with silence. For her, nothing had changed. Chains still wrapped her, ropes still held her, voices still cut her soul. She had been sold, but not saved. At least not yet, among the noise. One man stood quietly at the back, his arms crossed, his face calm. He was not cheering, he was not laughing, he was only watching. His eyes did not shine with greed. They carried something different, something rare, something quiet, something human. The villagers noticed him, whispering among themselves. "Who is he?" they asked. "I have never seen him before." Another replied. He was not from their village, not from their farms. He looked like an outsider, his clothes simple, his presence unnoticed until now. The auctioneer cleared his throat, raising the papers high. "Sold to the highest bidder," he repeated. But then the quiet man lifted his hand, his voice soft but firm. "I will take her," he said. The crowd turned in surprise. Their laughter paused, their eyes narrowing. The auctioneer frowned. "You?" he asked. The man nodded once, his gaze never leaving the cow. "Yes, me," he said calmly. The villagers burst into laughter again, mocking him. "She is too big for you," one shouted. "She will eat all your land." Another mocked. "Why waste money on useless weight?" A third added. But the man did not answer them, he did not look at them, he only looked at her. The giant cow whose eyes were filled with sorrow. The auctioneer hesitated, unsure, but business was business. Money spoke louder than mockery. So the deal was sealed. The stranger stepped forward, his step steady. The ropes were handed to him, rough and heavy. When his hands touched them, the cow lifted her head slowly. For the first time, her eyes met his. There was no greed in his gaze, no laughter, no cruelty. Only a quiet softness, a kind of respect she had never seen. She blinked once, unsure, her body still trembling. But in that small moment, something different filled the air. A silence deeper than chains, stronger than shouts. The silence of connection. The villagers scoffed and shook their heads. "He will regret it," they muttered. "She will never obey," they whispered. But the man ignored them all. He led her slowly away from the platform, his hand steady on the rope. No whip, no stick, no harsh pull, only patience, only calm. The cow moved cautiously, her hooves heavy against the ground. The rope felt the same, but the hands guiding it were different. No force, no pain, only a gentle strength. She did not understand it, but she felt it, and for the first time her steps did not feel like chains. They felt like choice, even if small. The crowd followed for a while, curious, mocking. They waited for her to resist, to fight, to refuse. But she did not. She walked slowly beside him, her eyes still uncertain. The people grew bored and returned to their noise, leaving only the man and the cow moving forward into quiet. He spoke then, not loudly, not like the others. His voice was calm, almost like a whisper. "You are not meat," he said softly. "You are not useless," he added. The words meant nothing to the crowd, but to her, they were new. She tilted her head slightly, her ears flicking as if she understood or wanted to. The path out of the market was long, the sun still harsh. But with every step away from the shouting voices, the air grew lighter. The smell of dust and greed faded, replaced by the smell of grass and wind. The stranger walked with purpose, never rushing, never forcing, and she followed step by step, uncertain but willing. The villagers watched from a distance, shaking their heads. "Fool," one said. "He wasted his money." Another added. But they did not know. They could not see that something small but powerful had begun, a bond forming in silence, a thread of trust born from kindness. The cow lowered her head as they walked, her body still tired, but her eyes were different now, not fully broken, not fully lost. There was a spark, tiny and hidden, but alive. The stranger noticed, his lips curved in the faintest smile. He said nothing more. He did not need to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. As the market disappeared behind them, the world grew quiet, the fields wide, the sky endless. For the first time, she was not surrounded by chains of judgment, only by the steps of one human who had chosen her, not for profit, not for weight, not for meat, but for life. The journey was far from over, her fear still deep, her wounds still raw, but something had changed, something small but unbreakable. A stranger had appeared, and with him, a new path had opened, a path she had never imagined, a path toward trust. Her story was no longer only about cruelty. It was now about the chance of kindness. And that chance, fragile as it was enough to carry her forward. The road stretched long and dusty. The stranger walked in silence, holding the rope gently. Beside him, the giant cow moved slowly, her hooves pressing deep into the earth. To anyone watching, it seemed simple, a man leading an animal. But inside, it was far from simple. She was saved from slaughter, but she was not yet free. Her body trembled at every sound, every movement. When a cart rolled by, she froze, her ears twisting sharply. When children laughed in the distance, she flinched, as if expecting cruelty. She had lived too long among harsh voices, heavy chains, and cold hands. Trust was not easy. Trust was almost impossible. The stranger never raised his voice, never pulled with force. Yet his calmness was unfamiliar to her, and the unfamiliar made her restless. At times, she stepped forward willingly. At times she stopped, refusing to move. Her eyes filled with doubt, her body heavy with fear. The rope between them was not only a rope, it was a test. They reached a small field, green and wide, where the air was softer. The stranger tied the rope loosely to a wooden post and stepped back. He placed fresh grass before her, water clear and cool. She looked at it but did not move. Her eyes shifted to him, suspicious, uncertain. Was it another trick? Was it another trap? The stranger sat down a few feet away, silent, patient. He did not push her. He did not force her. He let time speak. He let silence heal. For hours, she stood still, her body stiff, her heart guarded. Finally, hunger won against fear. She lowered her head and tasted the grass. The taste was real, the water was real, and nothing hurt her. But still she did not trust. Not yet. Night came. Stars filled the sky. The stranger lit a small fire. The cow lay down in the field, but her eyes remained open. Every crackle of fire, every sound of the night made her ears twitch. She was no longer in the cruel barn, no longer in the noisy market. But safety was still a dream she could not hold. She belonged to a human again, and humans had only given her pain. The stranger spoke softly into the night, his words carried by the wind. "You are safe now," he whispered. "You are not meat. You are not useless," he continued. She could not understand the words, but she felt the tone. It was not harsh. It was not greedy. It was steady. Her ears moved toward him. Her body relaxed slightly. But still, trust was a mountain too high to climb in one night. Days passed. slow and steady. The stranger fed her every morning, water fresh, food plenty. He never struck her, never shouted, never rushed, but still, she kept her distance, her eyes cautious. Every step closer was followed by 2 steps back. Her past was a chain heavier than any rope. Sometimes, when he tried to touch her, she pulled away. Her body shaking, her breath quick, her eyes wide. She remembered hands that hurt, ropes that burned, voices that cursed she could not forget, not yet. And so the stranger waited. His patience endless, his kindness constant. He knew freedom could not be given by force, it had to be chosen. One afternoon a storm rolled in, thunder cracked, lightning flashed, rain poured heavy. The cow panicked, pulling against the rope. Her eyes wild with fear. She tried to break free, her body thrashing, her breath loud. The stranger rushed to her side, holding her steady, his voice calm. "Easy, easy," he whispered, rain running down his face. She fought against him, but he did not let go. He did not strike. He did not scream. He only held firm. Slowly, her panic lessened. Her body stopped fighting. She stood shaking, soaked and trembling, but alive. Her eyes met his, confused but softer than before. Why did he not hurt her? Why? Did he stay that night after the storm? She rested her head on the grass. The stranger sat nearby, his fire warm, his eyes watching quietly. For the first time she closed her eyes fully, sleep finding her without fear. It was not trust yet, but it was the first step toward it. The villagers who passed by laughed when they saw them. "He is wasting his time," they said. "She will never change," they mocked. But the stranger did not listen, and the cow did not care. Together they carried a silence stronger than mockery, a silence that slowly, slowly turned into understanding, claimed yes, but not, free-owned yes, but not trusted. Her chains were gone, but her memories remained. And yet something inside her was shifting, a question growing in her heart. What if this human was different? What if life could be more than chains and cruelty? The days stretched long, each one a battle of patience. The cow and the stranger walked side by side, still distant but no longer enemies. The bond was not built yet, but the seed was planted. It only needed time, care, and hope. And though her body still carried fear, her heart began to whisper a new word, possibility. Morning came with soft light, spreading across the field where the cow rested. Her massive body rose slowly, her eyes blinking against the warmth of the sun. She looked around carefully, her ears twitching, her heart still guarded. But something was different, something small but steady. She had slept without fear, and that was new. The stranger was already awake, preparing food, pouring fresh water. He did not rush, he did not shout. His movements were calm and gentle. When he placed the bucket near her, he stepped back quietly. He gave her space as if telling her, "This choice is yours." She lowered her head slowly, sniffing the water. Then for the first time she drank while he watched, her eyes never leaving his. Cautious but willing, days passed, and each day was a lesson. The stranger spoke to her often, his voice soft and even. She did not know the meaning of the words, but she knew the sound. The sound was not sharp, not cruel. It was warm. And slowly, her heart began to respond. One afternoon, he approached with open hands. He reached out slowly, letting her see, letting her choose. She stepped back at first, fear rising, memories burning. But he waited, his hand still, his body calm. Minutes felt like hours. Silence filled the air. Finally, her nose touched his palm, soft and quick. Then she pulled away, her body tense, her eyes wide. But the moment had happened. The wall had cracked. The stranger smiled faintly, not forcing, not rushing. He let her be, knowing trust was not a gift, it was a journey. The next day she came closer, her steps hesitant but brave. Again she touched his hand, again she pulled back, and each time, the fear lessened. The space between them grew smaller. The villagers still laughed when they saw. "Look at him, wasting time on a useless cow," they said. "She is too big, too broken, she will never change," they mocked. But the man did not answer. His eyes stayed gentle, his hands stayed patient. He knew change was happening, not loud, not quick, but real. He gave her a name one evening while the sun melted into the horizon. "Grace," he whispered, his hand resting lightly against her shoulder. The cow blinked slowly, her ears turning. Toward him, she did not understand the word, but she felt the meaning. It was the first time anyone had called her something more than useless, and the sound of it settled deep inside her heart. Grace began to follow him, not always, not fully, but enough. When he walked across the field, she stepped behind, her head low, her eyes curious. When he stopped, she stopped. When he sat, she stood nearby. The rope was no longer needed, the chain no longer necessary. Her steps were her own, guided not by force but by choice. At night, when the stars shone bright, Grace lay close to the fire. The stranger hummed softly, words slipping into the night air. She listened. Her eyes, half closed, her body calm. It was not fear that kept her awake anymore, it was peace, and peace was something she had never known. One day a storm returned, dark and wild. Thunder roared, lightning cracked, rain poured heavy on the land. Grace trembled, memories rushing back, chains, barns, voices, cruelty. Her body shook, her breath fast, her eyes wide. But this time, when the stranger came close, she did not pull away. She leaned into him, her massive body pressing against his side. He placed his hand gently on her neck, whispering calm words. Together they stood in the storm, not as human, an animal, but as two souls holding each other steady. From that day, something changed forever. The fear inside her began to fade, replaced by trust. Her eyes no longer searched for cruelty, they searched for him. When he appeared, her ears lifted, her body relaxed. When he spoke, her heart calmed. She had found safety. She had found home. The villagers noticed too, their whispers turning softer. "She follows him," one said in surprise. "She trusts him," another admitted. They could not explain it, they could not mock it, because the truth was clear before their eyes. The cow once called useless now carried dignity. The cow once called meat now carried grace. The bond was not built in one day nor in one act. It was built in silence, in patience, in kindness. It was built in every soft word, every gentle hand, every quiet moment. And with each passing day, Grace grew lighter, freer, stronger, not because her body had changed, but because her heart had healed. The stranger looked at her often, smiling softly. "You were never useless," he said one evening. "You only needed someone to see you," he added. Grace lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. And in that gaze, silent but powerful, the bond was sealed. The cow who was too big to breed, too big to keep, too big to save, was no longer a shadow in chains, no longer a mistake in the barn. She was Grace, a soul reborn, a heart restored. And though the world had rejected her, one human had chosen her, and that choice turned sorrow into hope, fear into trust, it turned silence into love. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in gold and red. In the wide field, Grace stood tall, her massive body shining in the morning light. Her eyes were calm now, her breath steady, her heart lighter than ever before. The stranger walked beside her. No rope, no chain, only trust between them. It had been weeks since the auction, weeks since the cruel voices called her useless. And in those weeks, everything had changed. She was no longer the cow who feared every sound, no longer the shadow. Locked in chains, she was Grace, strong, alive, and loved. Villagers often came to see her, their faces curious, their voices softer than before. "She looks different," they whispered. "She follows him like a friend," they said in wonder. No one mocked now, no one laughed. Because before their eyes was a truth they could not deny. The giant cow had become more than an animal. She had become a symbol of patience, kindness, and trust. One day, a group of children approached. They had once been afraid, hiding behind, their parents whispering in fear. But now they reached out their small hands, curious and innocent. Grace lowered her head gently, letting them touch her. Her eyes soft, her movements calm. The children laughed with joy, no longer scared. The villagers gasped at the sight, realizing how far she had come. The stranger stood nearby, his smile faint but full of pride. He knew the journey had not been easy. Every step had been slow, but it was worth it. Every moment of patience, every night of waiting. Because now the cow once sold for meat was standing free. Not free by ropes, but free in spirit. In the evenings, Grace often walked with him to the hills. They stood together watching the sky turn purple and silver. The wind brushed against her coat. The grass moved like waves. The stranger would rest his hand on her shoulder, speaking softly. "You were never useless," he said again and again. "You only needed love." She did not know the meaning of the words, but she knew the feeling. Each time he spoke, her heart calmed, her body trusted. And in that trust, her soul healed more. No voice of cruelty could touch her now, because one voice of kindness had changed everything. The villagers' respect grew slowly but surely. They began to bring food, to watch silently, to nod in quiet admiration. Some even whispered apologies, though too softly for him to hear. They had judged too quickly. They had mocked too easily. And now they saw what patience could create, a bond stronger than chains, stronger than fear, stronger than greed. Grace carried herself with dignity, walking slowly across the land. She was still massive, still larger than any other. But now her size was not a curse. It was her strength. Her beauty. Children ran beside her. Villagers followed her path with awe. The cow once called too big to breed was now too big to ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the stranger sat by the fire. Grace stood close, her shadow stretching far across the field. He looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet thought. "You changed me too," he whispered. "I thought I saved you, but you saved me." His words melted into the air, gentle and true, for in caring for her, he had found meaning, peace, and love himself. Grace lowered her head toward him, her eyes glowing softly in the firelight. No words were spoken, none were needed. The silence between them was powerful, louder than any shout. It was the silence of understanding, of connection beyond language. From that day forward, she was no longer remembered as the cow who could not breed. She was remembered as the cow who survived, the cow who trusted, the cow who taught. Her story spread beyond the village, carried by whispers, carried by hearts. People spoke of the stranger and the giant cow, of patience, of compassion, and every retelling carried the same message. Every life matters. No one is useless. Love can change destiny. Years later, children who once feared her grew up telling her story. They pointed to the fields where she once walked. They remembered the bond they had witnessed, the trust they had seen. And in their memories, Grace lived on, not as an animal, but as a lesson. The stranger grew older, his hair turning gray, his steps slower, but Grace never left his side, always close, always faithful. Together they watched countless sunsets, countless storms, countless stars. Together they lived not as owner and animal, but as companions, each giving the other what the world had denied: love, respect, and belonging. And when people asked him why he chose her that day at the auction, why he wasted money on a cow too big, too useless, too broken, he simply smiled and said, "She was never useless. She was only waiting for someone to see her." The cow, once rejected, once mocked, once condemned, now stood as a symbol of hope. Her massive form no longer a burden, but a gift. Her story no longer of cruelty, but of compassion. And in the heart of every person who heard it, Grace lived forever. A reminder that love can change even the darkest fate.